How many folks still need another minute to open Unity? Doing all right? All right. We've got a number of things to cover today. The first, well, I'll give a brief rundown of what we're going to be covering. We're going to talk about physics materials. Some of you have already talked about those a little bit, but they allow you to control the friction and the bounciness of different things in your game, which means that your ball doesn't have to just smack against a wall and then fall flat to the ground all sad. It can bounce off and do a bunch of fun stuff. We're going to talk about how to run different functions or just generally make things happen when objects hit one another. There's a special type of function that we can run in our scripts that we'll learn about. We're going to talk about how to move between scenes, which will allow you to have multiple levels in your game, which is always fun, unless it's not, but we'll do it anyway. We're going to learn about things called static variables, which I can't really briefly explain, but we will talk about them and you'll see why they're so awesome. We'll talk a little bit about user interface and just putting UI on the screen. And then maybe if we have time, we'll talk about how to have the direction you're aiming not change when the ball rolls. So lots of stuff to cover. We're gonna jump right in. The first thing, physics materials. Super easy. If you click on your ball, you can see that in Rigid Body 2D and in your Circle Collider, you have the spot for a material. Both of those are empty though. To change that, I'm going to right click in my assets folder and create 2D physics material 2D. Note that there's a regular physics material and there's a physics material 2D. You need the physics material 2D. I'm going to name this ball underscore PM. And now we have this nice little asset. It has a property for friction, for bounciness, and then some options for how, when two objects hit one another, how this physics material should react to others. For instance, maybe you have one object that doesn't have any bounciness at all. How do you want this bouncy thing to interact with that object? Do you want it to just take the bouncier of the two, or do you want it to sort of combine those together? So if you have two very bouncy things, when the objects hit, do you want a super bouncy response, or do you want it to just sort of be the average? I am going to just say the mean of whatever two bouncy things hit is fine. Same for friction. Bounciness by default is set to 0. 0 means there's no bounciness. 1 means that an object will bounce with the same force that it hit, which means that it will never stop bouncing. If you set it to more than 1, it will bounce with more force than it hit an object. That's a weird thing to happen. That doesn't happen in real life. I'm going to set this at 0.7 because I want my ball to be nice and bouncy. Now that I've done that, I can just click and drag my ball PM over into my Rigid Body 2D, and it's been applied. Now if I hit play, my ball should bounce more. Yes? Say again? The ball PM is the physics material. To create that physics material, I right clicked, went to create, down to 2D, and then to physics material. And then I just named it ball underscore PM. Once I've added that to my golf ball, I can see it bounces more than it did. Because before, let's see, When I didn't have any physics material on it at all, it would just fall and stop.
And that's boring.
It's boring. And so we throw this on there just to add a little life. It's boring, but it can also be really helpful for certain characters. Most platformers, you don't really want your character to bounce when they hit the ground. And you can create all kinds of different materials. Maybe you want, say we have a character that moves left and right, and you want to make an ice level. You might make it so that all of your platforms have a physics material with a really low friction. Or if you want to have some clouds in a game that bounce the player up, you might create a physics material that has a really high bounciness, and then you add that just to those clouds. Questions about physics materials? You'll have plenty of chances to play with them in the next assignment. Next up, did you have a question? Yes.
So you have like the ball in the assets folder. How do you do that?
To create, to put the ball in the assets folder, I just click and drag from the hierarchy and drop it in there, and that creates a prefab so that I can create as many as I want. And I don't have to recreate the whole thing. That does remind me, I added the physics material to the ball that's in my scene, but not my prefab. If I want the future iterations of this ball, if I want the future instances of the ball to have that physics material, I need to make sure that I select the prefab and then click and drag into there. And that's just how you update a prefab in any capacity if you want that to perpetuate. Questions about the physics materials? Yeah. Getting caught up, we can talk about that once we're done here. I think that most of the live streams should have most of the content that you need to get caught up, but aside from that, just more time. That won't be an issue. Let's see. Next up, let's talk about collision functions. How do I want to do this? I think I want to make it so that if my character falls off of the stage, they perish. Or maybe I just make this dangerous. If I hit this wall on the right, I want to reload this scene. So this is going to play into both our scene loading stuff and our collision functions. Step one is to select that wall. I'm going to rename it really quickly to death wall. And then I will create a new script. And I'm going to call this killbox. And I want it right in my scripts folder. Now that I've created that script, I'm going to open it up, and it looks the same as all of our other scripts. There's the start function, the update, all that. I don't need any of that. What I need is to, at the top, well, I'll hold off on the scene stuff. For now, just the collision functions. We have a box collider here, and it's a hard collider. For hard colliders, we want to say on collision enter 2D. And then it will betray me and not type the thing. So just start typing it and then have it autocomplete. Make sure that you include the 2D bit, otherwise it's not going to register because this is a 2D collider. 2D collider needs the 2D function. So let's break this down just a little bit. Void just means that we don't get any value back from running this function. It's just whatever code's in there runs. On collision enter, it's just the name of the function. But then we have this right here. This is a parameter. Collision 2D, what this means is we have access to the collision. The collision itself is kind of this package of data. It has a whole bunch of information about what hit this object, how fast, how hard, and at what angle, all that stuff. And if we want to get information from that, we can just use the variable collision. So just to see if this function is working, I'm going to type debug.log collision dot game object. And this will see which game object was responsible for the collision. What I expect to happen here is my player, when it hits the death wall, nothing will happen. It'll just hit the death wall. But we'll get a message in our console that says ball. That's the hope, because that's the name of the object, the game object that hit the wall. Let's see if it works. Make sure to save. If you don't save, nothing saves. And then we'll wait for 7 centuries for the domain to finish reloading. We'll hit play. And let's launch it over. And we can see, if we click console, we got ball. And every time we hit it, it should give us that again. Who needs an extra minute? Sure.
Why is it saying object instead of ball?
Saying object instead of ball. Let's see.
Oh, I was looking at parentheses.
All right, by show of thumbs, who needs another minute? Thumbs up for another minute. Cool, works for me. What would folks like for me to talk about again, or just re-explain? How does it work?
Like it, like the collision, like is that it has the collider on the sprite itself, but how does it know to have the little
How does it know to run the function when something hits it? I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I don't know. It's something that Unity has built into the back end of the collider components. I imagine it is something that they have in, I would say it's probably in their update. They're just doing the math for every possible place so that it could be hitting. Yeah, I don't know.
when you put the collision 2D, that is the box collider, right? That's what it's like going to?
Yeah, on Collision Enter 2D, this will actually run on. So you can have multiple colliders on the same game object. This will run regardless of which one is hit. This is only listening for some collider 2D. It could be a box collider, it could be a circle collider, it could be anything, to be overlapped or to be hit. We'll talk about overlaps in a minute. And as soon as that happens, then it runs. And if we want to see which collider it is, then we can also say collision dot collider. The incoming collider involved in the collision with the other collider. I might be wrong. It might be other collider then. No. The names of these variables are not great. My point is that if you have multiple on there, there's a way to figure out which one was hit. So that's incoming involved in the collision. So just saying collider would be the incoming collider. So other collider would be the one that was hit. Okay.
I got another question. For
Yeah.
You. I was trying to go back on the stream and see where you did it, and in the little debug, because we have it set to just say that it collided. Wait, how are you pulling up? I have console selected, but
Yeah. That's what I have.
Yeah, mine isn't showing. It's not giving me any of the options.
Is your script on the object?
No, it isn't. I just throw the script again.
Yeah, so making sure that the script's on the spike. That should do it.
There we go. Good idea.
Right.
Wonderful.
Is it giving anyone else trouble? Because it loves to do that. That's kind of Unity's thing.
Angry text and squiggly lines.
Or just true betrayal.
Yeah. And
Right.
yellow squiggly lines because you forgot a capital C. You know.
There aren't many of us in here. If folks want eyes on what they're working on, we can do that.
We got time.
We ready to move forward? All right. Then let's move on ahead. We have this function. We know that it runs when our player hits it. Do want to say, whenever you're setting up functions like this, having those debug messages before you try to actually run the code that you want to run is really helpful, because otherwise you can write the code and it doesn't work and you think, oh, there's something wrong with my code, when in reality your function's just never running in the first place. use debug messages to make sure that your functions are running when you think they are. On collision, enter 2D. Now we want to reload the level. If we hit the death wall, we reload the level. To do that, let's go up to the very top of our script and say using Unity Engine dot scene management. And this is what's going to let us move between scenes. And then to make it so that our collision function reloads the scene, we'll say scene manager, and that's manager as opposed to management. Scene manager dot load scene, and this is my scene called golf. We'll talk about a few different ways you can say which scene to load. If you head into Unity, and you have to wait because it's doing a thing, and you go to build profiles, and this is really important. So before you write any more code, why did it just open the thing? Okay. If you open build profiles and you look at scene list, this will show you all of the scenes that would, if you were to package up your project and make it ready for distribution, these are the scenes that would be included. You can only move between scenes that are included in the scene list. If you want to add a scene, like our golf scene here, we'll open the scene list and then click and drag the scene that you want into that scene list. And now it's there. Now when we try to load the scene, we can either use the scene's name, which is golf, or we can use this build index over here. If we use the build index, we can just say 1, and we're done. If we use the name, we just type golf in quotation marks, and that'll work too. I generally prefer to work with the build index because you can create a script that uses the current build index, adds 1 to it, and then that loads the next scene in your list. Killbox, scene manager, load scene 1, and that should, if we hit play, make it so that as soon as the character hits the wall, the scene reloads. And there we go.
Wow. It works.
Whose doesn't work? I'm gonna throw in something wacky now. I'm gonna, in my hierarchy, create a 2D physics dynamic sprite. This is just a 2D sprite with a collider and a rigid body on it. I just don't want to have to make it myself. I'm gonna call this Life Ruiner, because it's going to demonstrate an issue with how our code is currently set up. I'm going to set the gravity scale to 0.2.
Oh, I know it's coming. That is a life ruiner.
Like, oh no. Now it always reloads because some random object hit the death box.
So now we have to make it if only the player hits.
Right.
That's a life ruiner.
In order to do that, the first thing we need to do is make sure that we have some way of identifying that the ball is our player. The best way in Unity to do that is to select our ball, go over to tag, click the drop down, and choose player.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's a built-in tag, super easy. Now anything that we want to have check for the player, we can just see if it has the player tag. In our code, that'll mean when something collides with the kill box, we want to see if the game object that collided, so that should look familiar, collision.gameObject dot compare tag. So we're going to run a function on this game object and see if it has the player tag. And if it does, then we reload the scene. You can also do it a little bit differently. You can say collision.gameObject.tag equals player.
That makes a lot of sense. Did you put 2 equals signs?
Yes. In C#, 1 equal sign sets something equal. 2 evaluates whether 2 things are equal. So if you want to see whether or not 2 things are the same, use 2 equal signs. If you want to tell C# that 2 things are the same, then you just use 1. All right. Questions about what this is doing? Okay.
I do have one question.
Yeah.
What's kind of like applications for this? This is the same exact way, in theory, you would complete a level. So like if you hit the door with the player, then it would load the next scene in the list.
To
You
load,
decided to load scene next or load scene.
I'll show you how to do the
Okay.
next. But you're exactly right. This is exactly how you'll handle something like that, where you get to it a certain area. You will probably use a trigger for that as opposed to just a hard collider. That way you overlap the door, and then if it's the player overlapping the door, you just head on to the next level. Ideally, now that we're checking for the player, the kill wall, the death wall should just ignore the little thing falling from the sky, and we'll only reload the level if our player hits it. Please. Thank you. Nice. Beautiful.
Got a scene question.
Yeah.
So I see that when you change the death wall to be red, you know, to differentiate it for this
Yes.
demonstration, I noticed just now that it goes under the bottom one and over the top one. Is
Yeah.
there like an order?
Yes.
Like, is there like a keybind for that, or where do we?
You can reorganize things in the hierarchy.
And that changes their order on the.
That's one way to do it. You can also say you wanted the red wall to be behind everything. Then you could select the red wall, go over to its sprite renderer, and change the order in layer. Lower will place it behind more things. Higher will place it in front of more things.
And if you set something's order layer to be -5 and something else to be -5, then they're on the same layer, or can
Right.
two things be on the same layer?
They'll be on the same layer. By default, everything is on 0. If you have 2 things on the same layer and they overlap, it can just be a little bit uncertain which one will load.
Yeah, because you just kind of decided that it would go under one and over the other layer. I didn't know if
Right.
that was because the order they were created or placed there or something like that.
So this one is static sprite 3. This one is death walls on top. I guess it was probably the order they were created, if I had to guess. And I do, because I don't know.
It's a good guess.
And it was your guess.
Oh, yeah.
So I would just use order and layer. Great question though. Cool. Now then. What if the death wall What if the death wall destroyed things regardless of what it was, but reloaded the scene only when it was the player? That could be fun. So, in that case, when something hits the wall, if it's the player, reload the scene. That's great. Else, destroy. And we'll just say destroy collision dot game object. So just running through this really quickly, this means when something collides with the kill box, the death wall, if that thing that hit the death wall has the player tag, we'll reload the scene. But if it doesn't, then we will just destroy whatever object hit the death wall. Let's see, I'd like to keep that visible. But no such luck. No more life ruining for you. Indeed. So are we feeling okay about this? If we're feeling okay about that, I'm going to set up my other wall to be a victory wall. I'm going to make it, what's the color of victory?
Let's say teal.
Maybe gold on that.
I was thinking gold, but we have a lot of green going on as far as what people were saying. I was feeling a
Maybe
nice...
like a puke green yellow.
Ooh, that's a great idea. There we go. Let's drop that down a little. Right in there. There. The color of victory. Now, let's create a new script.
Oh, actually, I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Just put in the else destroy collision game object. It's not liking my other parenthesis.
Not liking your other parentheses.
Doesn't like it.
Let's see what's wrong with your other parentheses.
It doesn't like it.
In curly brackets. The way that you're.
Oh yeah, those are curly. Yeah.
So after
maybe it should
if.
be-
So really quickly,
Let me pull it back up just to show you. Yeah, so when you're working with if statements, all of the stuff that you want to happen if the condition is true should go within a set of curly brackets.
Oh,
And then when you say else, anything that should happen when the condition is not true, so when it's false, they should go within another set of curly brackets. Otherwise, what happens is the condition, if it's true, will only apply to the first line. As soon as you encounter a semicolon, it'll be like, done. Cool. I don't have anything else to check. And do. That does mean that you can write one-line if statements, but you don't have to. And this is, I think, quite easy to read. If it were me alone, I'd probably write it as one line, but I'm a fancy man. Let's see. Victory wall, that's where we were. Let's add a component, create a new script. We'll call it, what should we call it? The idea is that this will move us to the next level.
Goal.
Goal? What did you say?
I said stage complete.
Say it one more time.
Stage complete.
Stage complete. Let's say stage goal. We'll put stage goal in our scripts folder. This is going to look really similar, so I'm just going to copy the collision function. Okay. It's mad. Why is it mad? Exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't know where you're
I need to add my using Unity Engine scene management so that scene manager is known within the script. We probably don't want everything that hits the stage goal to be destroyed, so I'm going to ditch that part. We also don't want it to just reload scene 1. The only other scene I have right now is the first scene, the sample scene. So I'm going to just say to load scene 0 if the player collides with this wall. Let's see how it goes. I hit, and now it's reloaded my first scene. But that still only loads one scene. If I have this script for stage goal and I have another scene, let's just duplicate golf so I get golf 1. I'm gonna, oh wow, because I didn't save golf before I duplicated it, golf 1 doesn't have the victory wall. So I'm gonna go back to golf, I'm gonna delete golf 1, and now I will duplicate now that it's been saved. Cool. Just so there's a little bit of a difference between the two, I'm gonna move death wall to the left, victory wall to the right. And now I'll head on back to golf. So I have the level that I would have after my golf level. When I hit the victory wall in golf, I want to go to golf 1. Yes.
Why is it working?
It shouldn't work yet.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
the
The first thing we have to worry about is getting golf 1 in that scene list. If we don't have it in the scene list, then there's no way for us to load it. So we'll click and drag golf 1. Note that its index is 2. So golf is at index 1, golf 1 is at index 2. Names are weird. Don't worry about it. The important thing is that just having one number in our stage goal is really not going to help us very much. What we should do instead is some stuff that's outside of our collision. Do we need to do it there? We don't have to, but it's probably a good thing to do. Yeah, let's do it. We need an integer because an index is an integer. I'm going to call this build index. Lowercase b, capital I. If you write this out like this and you don't include private, public, anything like that, it'll be private by default. I'm just going to leave it like that. And then I'm going to say on void start, because at the beginning of play, we want build index to have whatever the current scene's build index is. That way, if we want to go back a stage, we just subtract 1. If we want to go forward a stage, we just add 1. It'll be great. If we want to reload, we just say build index. So int build index is equal to, with 1 equal sign, scene manager dot get active scene. Get active scene is a reference to the whole scene asset. We just want its build index. So we're setting the build index variable in our stage goal to be equal to the build index of the active scene. That means when something hits the stage goal, if that thing is the player, rather than loading scene 0, we will load build index plus 1. So in start, we get the build index of the current scene, and then on collision enter, we check to see if it's the player, and if it is, we load the scene at the build index 1 higher than our current. It's like getting in an elevator and going up 1 floor. We'll see if it worked. It did. How about that? Let's see what happens if we run into, running into stage goal in Golf 1.
That one wasn't, that doesn't have a stage to go to.
Exactly. We can see in our error here, scene with build index 3 couldn't be loaded because it has not been added to the active build profile or shared scene list. We don't have a scene after Golf 1. Yeah, what's up?
Mine still doesn't work.
Cool, let's figure it out.
Let's figure it out.
So let me just
Curly brackets. Does your player have player type? There it is.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In this case, where we have a function that's trying to look for the next scene regardless of what level we're on, let's just make sure that the build index we're going for exists.
It already exists. Yeah, they already
So if the player is the thing colliding, and then within that if statement we're going to nest another one. We're just going to say if, well, let me see. We'll say scene count. If scene count is less than or equal to, we'll see if this still breaks. It's difficult to know sometimes whether they're going to start at 0 or not. Because if scene count is you'll notice that we start at index 0, but the scene count is 3. There are 3 scenes here. So if we're trying to load the build index 3, we're going to have a hard time. So it might need to be different. It should definitely be greater than anyway. I'm going to say just greater than build index plus 1. And if that's the case, let's see if that works. That didn't work at all. The smarter way for me to do that would have been to debug and see what the value of scene manager scene count was before I tried to use it. And then I can do the same thing for my build index plus 1, and we can compare the two. I'm going to temporarily comment out the stuff about changing scenes. So all that's going on right now is when something hits this, I get 2 messages. First, scene count 1, which is odd.
Is it maybe
That
because
might
you
be.
duplicated? Or-
Scene count might actually refer to the number of scenes that are currently loaded, because there is a way of streaming scenes together.
Which right now we're not doing. We just
We're not doing that at all, no. But that would have been this.
Because the only loaded scene will be the one that's active. If we want to check that, then it's just going to equal 1 every time.
Scene count and build settings might be it.
I see specific. Because then you should have golf and then golf 1 also. And then the one before it.
There we go. So if scene manager, scene count, and build settings, if that number is greater than build index plus 1, then we'll load build index plus 1. And no error.
Oh, that was interesting.
Hmm.
When you were just playtesting there,
It popped what was forward, or
well, no, actually, if you complete this level, and you go to complete this level, the ball, the arrow, is rolling with the ball on this one, but it doesn't on the other one.
it does. It super does. It's just the fact that I can launch it and hit the
Oh, yeah,
wall
so it's not
before it.
spinning. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
come on. I was thinking, I was like, that's an issue.
Alright.
Non-issue.
And now we also should think about our kill box, because if we're on the wrong scene, then loading 1 means we go back to a particular scene that might not be the one we're on.
Load active.
Let's grab our build index, all of this code that we have that lets us know where we currently are. And instead of 1, we'll type build index. And that's just how we will reload the current scene.
Bless.
So we're in golf 1 and the victory doesn't work, but we do successfully reload the correct scene. So that's scene management. Something that it's worth knowing. Generally, stuff like scene management, you'd want to handle through something like a game manager where you can just say, hey, big thing that manages all the stuff in my scene, reload or load the next level. That way any number of different things can call that function without having to rewrite a bunch of code. We're not going to worry about that too much right now because it adds another level of complexity, but it's worth noting. Next up, let's talk about static variables next. What is a static variable? Why does it matter? Great way to establish that is by making something like a stroke counter. The idea, my hope, is to get a little number counter right here that will say how many times I have launched the ball. Cool? Cool. Let's right click in hierarchy, go down to UI, and we're going to say text Text Mesh Pro. It's going to bring up a pop-up that talks about importing TMP Essentials. Click Import TMP Essentials. You definitely need them.
Are they essential?
They're essential.
I see.
They are extremely well named. And then you don't have to get the examples and extras. But what you should see is not much, because it should put a little white outline from the middle of your screen toward the top right. But if you hit game, you'll see it's a little different. If you zoom out, you can see the canvas is huge. And it's just a funny little thing. This is the shape of the screen of what the camera can see. I'm going to throw my text right up here. If we click game, you can see where that fits. You can also play with the position over here in the inspector tab. And by default, 0. My jump count is 0. This right here needs a script though. Something to tell it to update its number. So I'm going to add yet another script. I'm going to call it stroke counter. Create an add. It should go in my scripts folder with the rest. And what I'm going to do, and this part is new, we haven't done this part before. So I'm going to create a variable of the same type as the script. So it's stroke counter instance. And this needs to be static. So static stroke counter instance. By making this static, it means that no matter how many stroke counters we may have in a scene, this value will be the same across every instance of the script. You can only ever have one value. If you have If I create a bunch of the balls and I throw them everywhere, each reference we get to that ball's rigid body will be different. It'll be related to that specific game object's component. So each reference is individual and unique. But if that rigid body component was static, that would not be the case. There would only be one reference. So static stroke counter instance. And I'm going to change start here to awake. Awake runs right before start. And that can be really helpful for setting up your references to components that are on the same game object. Anything you would want to do before other objects have an opportunity to go and say, hey, what's your value for this variable? So you set up a game object and you construct it in awake, and then start would be where you say, hey, what about that bit over there? What's that game object doing? So in awake, we will say if instance is null, which means if this variable doesn't have a value, then we will set it to this script. So if we don't have a value already for this variable, well, I'll take the job. But if there's already something that's claimed, like I'm the stroke counter instance for this scene, then we don't worry about it. And this is just a way of being nice and tidy with things. Technically, you could just say on awake instance is this, but then you run into the possibility that you might have some issues if you accidentally have more than one instance of the script in your scene. Also in stroke counter, because we're working with UI stuff, we're working with our Text Mesh Pro, we need to, in the same way that we do for scene management, say using TM Pro. And that'll give us all the functions and stuff for our text. We'll say, the funny thing about our text components, the name of this component is ridiculous. It's Text Mesh Pro U GUI. And I'm going to call it text comp for text component. In awake, we want to initialize that variable, get that reference. So text comp, that's not the thing, text comp equals get component Text Mesh Pro U GUI. And there we go. What else might our counter need if it's going to count? A number, yeah.
Yeah, just plus one.
We will have an integer that we will say is just called stroke count. By default, it'll be 0. So what's the best way to introduce this? We want the stroke counter to increase when?
When we input to.
Right. When we provide the input, that makes it so that our player launches. Our stroke counter should increment, it should go up by 1 when we launch. So we want some way to, from our launch function, tell the stroke counter to increase stroke count by 1. To do that, we need a function. This will just say void. I'll call it stroke up, I guess. Could also call it count stroke, but I'm trying to stay away from that because we have stroke count, we have stroke counter. It can get a little bit confusing. I'll call it stroke up. We need this to be public. Who remembers what public means? Someone who's not Tyler.
Anyone can access it.
Say again?
Anything can access it.
Right. It can be accessed from outside of the script that owns it. So with that involved and knowing that this is static, I believe it, being static, it's also public by default, but I'm going to make this public just in case. Public static stroke counter. So we can get this value from anywhere because there's only one, which is awesome. And then we can have it call this function to increase stroke count by 1. We'll just say plus equals 1. And then in launch, here's how you'll say, hey, what about that static variable? You can say stroke counter dot instance dot, and then you'll call the stroke up function. Okay, so there's a lot there. Just went over a lot of information. Recapping. Stroke counter as a script, we will only have one in the scene. As a result, having that be static makes some sense because we will only ever need one value at a time. Having it be public and static means that we can get a reference to that one instance of it from anywhere. Any script can just say the name of this class and then grab a reference to this variable. Once you have a reference to the variable, you can call the public function that this script has so that you can increase the stroke count. What's important here is that golf ball does not need to have any access to the stroke count itself. It's not changing a variable. It is just calling a function. That's, generally speaking, how we want to handle talking between scripts. We want to have scripts tell other scripts to run functions that are already in those scripts. Yes?
Would we not want stroke count to be static too?
It doesn't need to be. And it makes more sense for it not to be.
Because if there were like multiple golf balls, then they would need their own stroke count.
Sure, yeah. That's a great example. It's really urging me to get ahead of myself because we're setting it up this way and there is a problem with it. So yeah, you're right. Let's see what happens right now. Does anyone have a prediction for what will happen if I do it now? Yes. It will do not a damn thing. Because
Is it attached to
it's got the script and stuff, and that value, let's debug that. Right now it looks like nothing's happening, so let's work backwards. First, is stroke count increasing? So every time stroke up is called, we should see this message with an increased integer. Yep. So stroke count is increasing. What?
But the can I answer?
Yeah.
But the text isn't set to be adjusted to anything. It's just
Right. There's
we
no.
have a stroke count number that exists. It's just not being displayed there because we're not telling it.
Exactly. We have this number. The number's doing exactly what it should. But we haven't actually used our text component. We haven't told it to update what it's displaying. So in stroke up, we now need to say text comp dot text, because there's the text property within the text mesh pro component. Text is equal to stroke count dot to string because it's a number and it needs to know to treat it as a string. String just means a string of characters. Like if you were to take dry alphabet soup and just put string through all of it. And then you give it to a loved one who pretends to be thrilled. What you'll note is that that update for the text for the stroke counter did not require checking continuously an update. It is a really tempting thing for a lot of folks to continuously check what is stroke count over and over and over in update, but that is not something that's likely to change 60 times a second. This is only ever going to change when this is called. It is a discrete moment. So it's really important that we only change it when we know that something is likely to have changed it. Change that value. Now, let's see what happens when we move to the next stage. We haven't brought our stroke counter in, have we? In that case, let's go ahead and take our canvas and let's drag it in and make it a prefab. That way, any scene where we want the stroke counter, we can just pop it in. And we have it. So now if I go back to golf, hey, what's that? It's 0. And then if I do more stroke counting, it's just 0 again. What's that about? Well, as was predicted earlier, this not being static means that it's reset on each stage. If we make the static though, meaning there's only one value,
Even when you go between stages, it'll keep the same number.
exactly.
Speaking of the numbers at all, mine's not appearing. Speaking of everything working smoothly, mine.
That's extremely funny. So let's,
I just went to test, some kind of understanding how, it all makes sense, and then I just go to test, and then the 0 doesn't even appear on the screen.
so this loads as 0, but then if we click it again, it loads as 5. That's a funky thing. We'll talk about that in just a second.
Surely I've got some kind of visual setting.
Go to game.
Okay, cliffhanger. I'm looking for a visible or like a toggle or something.
This is just how the UI and stuff is handled. It's supposed to look like this.
Okay.
So you should be seeing the 0.
Yeah, I just put it in a very visible spot. It's like, it's not behind anything. It's empty space right there. So it shouldn't be, that's fine.
Well, that felt a little weird. That size is 4.
Oh yeah, it just
Oh, no,
matches
I
the-
was wrong. It shouldn't appear here. It should be absolutely minuscule down here.
So the UI doesn't match the camera, the UI goes like this. So it is actually there, it's just there.
Yeah. just really small. Cause
So can we adjust the UI size, or should I adjust the seam size?
if we were to adjust it so that this is the same, the size that you see the text here is the size that it is going to appear in your game. And right now, this is in front of it. So what you want to do instead is you'll take the text, let's pull it up a bit,
So
and
the
let's
UI is different than the actual scene, because it's a different layer or whatever. Yeah, okay. So now we just have it appear in the bottom left.
let's have this take up a reasonable amount of space. And then you can click and drag it up there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm also
Very
not
cool.
having my shot.
Yeah, mine did the same thing. It's kind of ass backwards.
It is a little bit.
Just a tad.
Where you?
Oh,
That's fine. Can I see this?
it's right there.
Oh, okay, cool. So this is a super simple. This right here is your screen for UI. This
Oh.
being outside of it means that it's not going to look the same.
Um,
So you want this to be big enough to be visible within this enormous thing.
I see.
And now you go to your game. There.
Thank you.
Yep.
I did the same thing. It's like the zero should be there. It's just not there.
Yeah.
Nice, see if it actually works. Since I can see it now. I didn't think the UI would be a whole separate thing. It's like that big ass square. I mean, I guess it makes sense. I suppose. Wow.
Fabulous. So the challenge we were facing is that if we start in golf, we get a couple strokes in, and then it reloads at 0 again, despite it being static. That's weird. But if we provide another stroke, it immediately goes back up and shows that it was still counting. It just didn't show. Reason for that is because we only update our text component in stroke up. So it's only updating when a stroke is provided. What we can do is say, you could do this on awake. I'm going to do it on start. Actually, nah. I'll put it in awake just to keep our script nice and clean. If you at any point find that you have an error in stroke counter that talks about something not being set to an instance of an object, it is likely because you have stroke counter as a script on something that does not have a Text Mesh Pro component. Just a heads up. So when I come around and you're like, I have this error, and I tell you what it is from across the room, that's it. But now we update our text component with the stroke count at the beginning of play as well. Stroke count by default is 0, so that's not going to cause any issues. And there we are. And now that stroke count can persist throughout the entire game. We could also do a fun thing where, say we have a maximum number of strokes. Maybe you only have 9 strokes. And instead of stroke up and counting up, we count down.
Then when 0 reset, huh?
Perhaps.
Game over. Do something.
So if that's what you want to do, then we'll need scene management up top, right? If we want to have it reload, if we run out of strokes, it's pretty bad. In that case, let's just say we'll go back to scene 0, because the consequence is less important than, let me see if I can spell. What actually happens is less important than just showing you how to do something like this, because conceptually it can be applied in any number of ways. Stroke count -1, update the text. If stroke count is less than or equal to 0, then scene manager dot load scene, I'll make it 0. We could also imagine this loading a game over screen that then allows you to restart the game entirely. It could be any number of things.
Well, hold on a second. Thought you'd sneak one past me. Well, I'm getting too good at this now.
What?
Well, that's not gonna work.
Why not?
Because you just did the first part of what you talked about. You said, what if instead we make it go down? we have. Oh no, you did change the minus. Never mind. Take back everything I ever said. Never listen to me again.
Ever? I was really excited too because I thought that I had missed something and you were really just on top of it.
See, I would have been if you forgot that.
Yeah.
But you did.
And there we are. Another case where, again, we don't have to check and update to see if a number has reached a threshold. And that's the thing here is this number, we are checking to see if it has reached a threshold. As many people as can say it with me as possible, we are checking to see if this number has reached a threshold.
And that could be like HP or something.
It could be HP, it could be a certain number of collectibles, it could be a certain number of collectibles, it could be a certain number of collectibles,
It could be a certain number of kills. It could be
a certain number of collectibles.
a certain number of collectibles, perhaps. And
It could-
perhaps while you're doing that, you could collect some.
It could even be a certain number of collectibles. It could be anything.
But like, can you be collectibles for?
It could even be a certain number of collectibles.
What if you were playing a game where you needed to like?
Collect something?
Yeah.
Then I have awesome news for you. This could even be used for a certain number of collectibles. It's life changing so long as you're concerned about collecting a certain number of collectibles. And then when you reach a certain threshold with those collectibles, doing anything at all. For instance, changing the scene.
Could those collectibles be XP orbs that level your character up?
Maybe.
It could be a certain number of collectibles.
Regardless of what they are or are not. What they could be is a certain number of collectibles. And I hope that we have said it now enough that you will remember until you die.
The number of times you said so.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see, what else? Is there anything we haven't talked about that was on our list?
Oh, I know something.
I
I'm
have
gonna wait.
something else that's a problem.
Cool.
So, as soon as, like, you launch for the last stroke, it won't, like, give it time to see if you actually make it in the hole.
Mm. Cool.
So like wait until ball momentum equals well
Linear velocity max.
linear velocity. Yeah, you know the technical term.
And
Until
you-
that equals 0 to then. Well, no, because then that would wait until that wouldn't up the stroke count until it stops moving.
So for
You
that,
just cheat through it.
so for that, it's a great question.
Maybe on the last one you could put like a 2-second timer.
Well, the thing is, you're talking about timers, which is legitimate, and there is a way of saying wait until, and then you just define a condition. But we haven't talked about coroutines yet, and that's what you will use.
I mean, another way you could do it, I guess, is if the stroke count equals quote unquote -1. So you would take your last stroke, you go to 0 strokes, and then when you go to take another stroke, then it would say game over.
Yeah, in that case, it might be helpful to place this above this. It's going to happen so quickly, though, it's unlikely to make any difference. But yeah, it's largely a matter of... Right now, we don't have a game where letting things resolve is really part of the strategy. Things just kind of go, and then you go a different direction whenever you want to. But you're exactly right. You would set something up to wait until the magnitude of the linear velocity was near to 0.
And then if during that time you hit the stage goal or a spike on the
Then
wall,
you would...
then it would do that and you would restart.
Right.
Or you could get a collectible to give you an extra stroke. You know?
Yeah.
Certain number.
A certain number of them.
Let's see. I don't know if we have enough time for aiming the ball without rolling.
That was what I was waiting
I can show you how to do it, but we are just going to kind of have to move through it. The important thing is to recognize that the direction here, the thing we have that points, it rotates the way we want it to because it's rotating the whole ball, right? It's not actually the direction that's rotating, it's the
just
ball.
visual representation.
In order to have that direction continue to rotate in the way that it currently does, it needs a parent that I will call, I meant to say create empty parent. It needs a, okay. I'm going to right click prefab, unpack completely so that I can just mess with these things. It needs a parent. I'm going to call it aim target. And that right there will only need a script. It's a script for aiming. So I'm just going to call it aim. And now when the aim target rotates, we see that the direction rotates as we want it to. Ball, we will leave mostly alone. We are going to do most of our stuff in aim. This needs to handle input in the same exact way that the golf ball does, because all the rotating, that is going to be done in here. We're not changing rotation for the golf ball anymore. All of that will just be rolling. So I'm going to snag that rot IA. Don't even need the rotator. We'll take the rot speed. Ditch rotor. I'm going to throw this over here so we can just have both. Something we don't have in here that we will want is a variable for the current rotation. Because we're not adding anything anymore, we are setting rotation. And that's going to be private float. I'm just going to call it, I'm going to call it rot z because it's just the rotation along the z axis. And it'll help us a little bit because we're going to have to create a full 3-dimensional vector to set this the way that we need to. So we have our move set up. The rotation is going to be equal to itself minus the rotation input action dot x. Let's rot z. Big thing is here, instead of rotation minus equals rotation direction x, we're multiplying by rot z. We're doing it all right here, basically. And it's okay for us to do it in update because there's nothing physical here, it's all about appearance. So we have our input, our rot z, but we need to apply that rot z to our transform. Transform dot rotation, except not rotation, sorry. Rotation brings you into quaternions, which are a 4-dimensional vector. It's wild. We're just going to use Euler angles, because that's going to be our XYZ that we're used to. We're going to set that equal to a new vector 3. And that's going to have the value 0, 0, rot z. So we are in update using our input action to update what the target of our aim should be, what our direction that we want is. And then we set our rotation to a vector that has x and y values of 0, because we don't want to rotate along those axes because we're in 2D. And then we just apply that rotation to the z-axis. And that's done. This script is done. If you'll remember, we used GameObject.transform.right to get the red axis, which was the direction we wanted to fire, right? We wanted to launch in that direction. But now we want to do that for the aim target. If we want to use the transform of a child of a game object, so if we remember, this is a parent, this is the child, then rather than game object transform right, we can just say, and game object here was always optional, it was just the longhand. We can say transform.getChild. This is going to be the child at the index 0. It's the first child of ball. And then we get the red axis for that. And that's it. Rotation speed of 5 is way too much. Even 2 is way too much. And there we go. Yes. And then
All of these scripts when you turn in part 1, or just like the golf ball and the first?
say again?
Do we need all of these scripts when you turn in the first part, or like?
For the first part, you will only need the script for the golf ball. Just turn in what you have and it's fine. I don't expect anyone to have kept up with this. That was lightning. What?
Oh, yeah, there's something wrong somewhere. I think it'll give you a giggle too. Get over here when you get the chance. Oh wow, it's like an ellipses, yeah. Oh, it's kind of cute. I like it. I think it's cool.
Kind of hard when it stops in the middle. The direction's actually really good.
And just so that anyone revisiting the stream can see the code for these two, just gonna hold on that, because the other stuff we spent plenty of time working with, but these we just flew through. And then we'll quickly go back here. wait for the domain to finish reloading. Come on. I did not change 20 seconds worth of stuff.
It's just making sure.
So the dir remained just the sprite renderer. Aim target is just a parent with that aim script. We didn't change anything about the ball.
There's no bug, maybe.
All right.
Never mind.
And with that, I'm going to end the stream.